morning, everybody. In the interest of time, please take your seat. So we're ready to start with the presentation by my colleague Keutzer, who doesn't need introduction. Kurt, before becoming a computer scientist, actually studied Tibetan at Bloomington in Indiana. So he is one of our group. He's part of the group in Buddhist studies. His principal appointment is, of course, in the School of Engineering, but he regularly reads with Jake and other colleagues Tibetan material. So his talk is going to kind of delve into what AI can do for Buddhist studies. Thank you, Kurt.
Thanks, Alex.
The floor is yours.
So today I'll be investigating, does Buddhist studies need an AI assistant? And broadly, I'm going to have three parts to my talk today. The state of the art in AI, what is academic Buddhist studies, and how can AI assist Buddhist studies? And yesterday, I've adapted my talk a bit to talks yesterday. This whole issue came up, what is AI versus machine learning, deep learning, large language models, agents, and so forth. And I can actually go on and on about this, but I wouldn't have time to talk about much else. So if you're interested, just in case you are, I have a whole talk about this as part of a keynote at the Design Automation Conference in 2021. That's actually on YouTube. And then you just search on it there. And then much more recently, earlier this year, I gave a talk at the MLSys conference. And the videos are not up there, but my slides are. So you can take a look there. And I go on and on about it. Okay, so but I'm just going to jump now to what's the state of the art. And on the left here we see a whole series of different applications from computer vision, audio, multimedia, and natural language processing. And on the far right, what you see is this little kind of, you might think of it as an algorithmic element, a particular style of neural net. And the amazing thing is that I've worked on all 12 of these over the last 17 years. I've been involved in machine learning, then deep learning, now large language models. The best solution to any of the problems on the left all basically come from one paradigm, one algorithmic unit, which is the transformer. So I'll probably say 2 or 3 times because I'm just astonished myself, having worked my whole over 40-year career in algorithms, I guess over 45 now. We have never seen anything like this. We've never found an algorithmic paradigm that held on for any period of time, much less kind of consolidated around a single algorithmic element. So this is truly, truly astonishing. And this is kind of culminated in this large language model, GPT 4.0. Of course, they're constantly evolving, and there's 4.0i and so forth. And that was presented to the public through ChatGPT. And based on, I guess, the successes of the prior use of transformers and so forth, they did something that seemed kind of naive at the time, which is they just kept dramatically increasing the number of transformers that you used, right? So this apparently naive approach, which from what I gather from conversations there was seen as kind of, expensive experiment, turned out to be unexpectedly successful, far beyond anyone's expectations. So the nature of that experiment was, I mentioned that a lot of these things, like you take speech recognition, we can pretty much do that with one transformer. They put 120 transformers together. Often, a lot of problems we can solve with 1, maybe 3 billion parameters. Sorry, my computer science colleagues, let's think of that as like a brain cell. They put together 1.8 trillion. They used $60 million of compute, and that took something like 2.5 million GPU days to do. So what we have there is the model was huge, the amount of computation they threw at is huge, and of course that digested an appropriately huge amount of data with this 13 trillion tokens. Think of that as about 10 trillion words taken from Common Crawl, Refined Web, Twitter, Reddit, your YouTube videos, and so forth, right? So it was an amazing experiment. Now, and that was fantastically successful. And one thing I'm going to convey is this training process, which again I don't have time to go through, what exactly happens. But you can kind of think that we put this big model and a bunch of data together, and we kind of bake them together, and it bakes into a single model all the knowledge that we picked up from the web, as well as kind of capabilities to reason a bit about that. And what I want to convey here is, with this notion of baking in, is that once we bake it in, it's like a cake. That's what it is. That's what you get. So, reiterate, tens of thousands of algorithms have been proposed over the years. Many of us spent our entire careers working algorithm for this, algorithm for that, and so forth. The current best solution, chances are, for the problems that we're working on are based on these transformers. And if I were to try my very best to distill, so what's unique about these transformers and these large language models? It's a very unique property that the more data we give it and the more computation we apply, the more performance improves over a broad range of applications. So if that doesn't sound unique to you, wouldn't that be great if that was true of humans, right? I mean, just imagine you kind of get a massage, good night's sleep, maybe a little head massage, shoulders, have a nice meal, and suddenly your IQ goes up 20 points, right? That's an analogy. But, that unfortunately that's not true, but it is somehow true of these transformer-based models. Now, the problem with those models, aside from them just being kind of like black box, we honestly don't understand them very well, and it's not just I'm not quite up to date. Nobody who understands them well, and anybody who doesn't feels they understand well is really on a fringy kind of like the field's kind of taking it under consideration. Maybe something like that is true. There's no consensus about how these work. But that black box also, the minute you're done training, what it knows is what it knows. It's not learning anything else. Now that's obviously unfortunate because we want to extend that capability. And so the way we extend that capability is what's called fine-tuning, which is we just essentially use the same paradigm of training, but we just add more data. And we can enhance the data of that model if we have the expertise. Fine-tuning can degrade the functional large language model, and Sebastian has become something of an expert on the process of fine-tuning. Of course, we need additional data sources, and we need quite significant computational resources to do this. So we've done this a few times. Sebastian went through this. I'll just go through it as much as an acknowledgement to our many data partners as anything else. So we did this on Tibetan with the help principally of Monlam AI, Geshe Monlam, and T here, who's here with us today, Jan from BDRC, 84,000 folks, Tsadra, Wisdom Publications, great to see you both here, Lotsawa House, and so forth. With cooperation among all those, certain amount of endorsement, I would say, we pulled together 2 million sentence pairs, which kind of brought Tibetan from a low resource language to kind of a mid resource language. French, say, has over 60 million sentence pairs. We had our own kind of grassroots effort here, kind of led by David Alpert, the Gandalf-looking fellow in the front here, and his volunteer army of basically principally Indian national students who wanted to get into natural language processing in some way. Oftentimes very junior students, oftentimes I have to say, we really don't have anything reasonable to you. Now I go, do we have something for you? So we get them gathering and cleaning up data. We also got a lot of help from Oliver Helwig, as Sebastian mentioned, Sarvam AI and AI for Bharat, which are both principally interested in the 22 scheduled languages of India, of which Sanskrit comes kind of dead last, but they are interested in Sanskrit as well. And Professor Mitesh Katra at IIT has been particularly helpful. And with that effort, we didn't get 2 million, but we got 1 million sentence pairs. And I think with those two together, we more or less created the state-of-the-art machine translation models for Sanskrit as well as Tibetan. And then finally, I think a little more on the drawing board, but with help from Fogwan Chan and Professor Bingenheimer there, Marcus Bingenheimer, we've gathered together data for Chinese, and I guess we can debate. Sebastian was confidently said we have state-of-the-art. I'll take his word on that. Yeah. Okay, so that's fine-tuning, but fine-tuning suffers from all the same problems of ordinary training. That the minute we're done fine-tuning, that's what the model does. It's kind of think we just add some more ingredients to a cake and kind of rebake it, but now once we've done with that, that's baked. So it's impractical to keep up with the advancement of state of the art in anything, additional information and so forth, through this process of training and fine-tuning. It's just too expensive and cumbersome. So, but we want to augment, again, I'm going to call it parametric knowledge, the thing that's baked in with data sources. And so the way we do this is a technique called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. So LLMs can be trained to actually not just recognize language, but understand language in such a way to gather then data from other sources, what I show here on the far right. We then augment that is used to augment the parametric knowledge, and then with that additional knowledge as well as the baked-in parametric knowledge, we can give better results to queries. I'm a big fan of Perplexity AI. I guess I should mention that first of all, that the founder, Arvind Srinivas, came from our Berkeley AI Research Laboratory, where I work as a professor. And I'm also a very modest investor, I should disclose. But I was able to wrangle for you all a 1 year free of Perplexity Pro. So yeah, get your cameras out, snap a picture of that, and try it, and you can share it with your friends as well. They're being reasonably evangelical at this time, but maybe now's as good a time as any to mention. I don't think that any of these major ChatGPT, these chatbots and so forth, are probably profitably accounting for the amount of computation that they're throwing. They're all competing to gather users, and so we're in this magical period in which we're getting, even if you're paying $20 a month, you're getting more than your fair share of computation. You can be sure. If you do choose to use this, I would recommend using the Claude 3 model among your choices, Claude 3 Opus. So what we see here in a retrieval augmented generation system is, on the far left is the prompt, just as like you'd use on any chatbot, that goes through the core model, but then it goes out and looks around the World Wide Web for the latest information, anything that might be relevant, augments that, summarizes that, and generates an answer to your prompt in that way. So this is a paradigm that we're trying to apply to Buddhist studies, and this Sebastian showed a bit of this yesterday. And so we kind of think of this Mitra search as kind of a Perplexity AI for Dharma studies, in which we have the same notion of a core model in the middle, but then we have a wide variety of data resources, both primary sources and a variety of languages, as well as personal libraries with the secondary literature, which we could then draw on to actually answer your query. So this is, it's a cartoon-esque slide. Sebastian gave what were more anatomically correct slides yesterday. It's a much more ambitious enterprise than may be represented by this cartoon, but I do think it can really help us advance Buddhist studies. But wait, one more tool that I'll mention in terms of us building an AI assistant for Buddhist studies is Google's Notebook LM. I have no affiliate, well, I do get a bit of funding from Google, but I haven't even been able to get the attention of the Google Notebook LM, even through my Google contacts. They're not bothering to return emails or anything. So I think that's partially due to the tremendous success of this. People, even Andrei Karpathy, if you know him, is raving about it. He's a very key influencer and truly brilliant individual. So what Google's Notebook LM gives you is it can read PDFs, so you can just pour in your PDFs. It'll do optical character recognition, at least for modern languages there. It'll do machine translation for popular languages, 38 languages, perhaps more. When I've given it PDFs of the Tibetan, it says, sorry, I don't translate Tibetan. It'll do summarization. I'll show you some other abilities. And it has the same capabilities of retrieval augmented generation that I showed you in the prior slide, but in the small. You can put in like 50 documents, not huge libraries. So I'm just flashing you the interface on the far left. You have your sources that you've drawn in. You can automatically generate notes, or you can simply add them. It will, in the lower right, you see a menu for creating a study guide or a table of contents or a briefing doc. You can generate a podcast if you want automatically. That's been one of its most popular features. And then finally you get the traditional chatbot prompt, which you can then use to query over the documents that you've read in. Okay, so taking that from the top in terms of, I'm in the old-time genre of telling you what I'm going to tell you what I told you. So how to build an AI assistant for Buddhist studies. Talked about how we're going to help you with searching, reading primary literature with machine translation, reading and managing secondary literature with something like Notebook LM. Later I'm going to talk about agents, which are really the one hot topic in AI that I haven't mentioned. And then I should give you the caveats though. I mean, some of you have used these and have some expectations, some of you have not. All these tools are under 2 years of age, so they have their challenges. And I think the most annoying thing for me is that they all have capacity challenges, and they don't exactly tell you. So you'll ask for a summarization of a document and you'll go back and go, you quit halfway. Or you'll ask for a translation of something and go, well, this is just the first 5 pages, but they don't really clue you in on that. Okay, so next, let's investigate a little bit what is this area of academic Buddhist studies. As Alex mentioned, I started hanging out with Tibetan scholar types back at Indiana with Dan Martin and Christopher Beckwith and Elliot Sperling and so forth. It was Tsukuhisa Takeuchi, Yael Bentor. It was kind of a magical era when I was there. So I had my own impression of what was Buddhist studies, but I'm going to talk in front of a bunch of Buddhologists, so I thought I better do my homework. So, again, in trying to see how are these tools really helping is, well, actually these chatbot tools and so forth, Perplexity, none of these particularly help doing something like Buddhist studies because I'm looking for essentially secondary literature that gives these broad surveys. And in addition, some of them will hallucinate and so forth. And our own Mitra search doesn't yet cover any secondary literature, so none of that really helped. So I was back to good old, conventional approaches to how to build a bibliography. And basically what I'm showing you here is the kind of visual of the bibliography that I built, basically going over the duration that the particular article covered or the lecture, and then color-coded to the region, either Europe and America, or Japan, or India, and so forth, and then the timeline of when that was covering at the bottom here. Okay, so I was happy. I had dreamed of finding kind of the single, published in 2022, grand endorsed. This is the field of Buddhist studies. Everybody's fist bump. This is it. No, nothing like that. So instead I came up with these 12 diverse articles, which rarely cite each other, incidentally, which is always surprising to someone from outside the field, since we have to cite to death, otherwise we get our papers rejected in computer science. So, but anyway, altogether I had 370 pages, and I didn't really have time to go through all that. So what I did was I assembled my sources in PDF form and created a notebook in Notebook LM, as I mentioned before. So there they are around the left. You can just simply drag and drop. This is not one of those things that sounds that easy, but actually it is that easy. And then I prompted it, say, for each of the 12 selected sources, identify the most common topics and list them in decreasing order of frequency, and then give references for each. And I've given a distillation of the topics there at the bottom, and that's not all it returned. I'll show you the raw data. I won't go in depth through it because you'll get the idea in just a moment. But again, this is from Notebook LLM's perspective, or the Gemini model underneath. From what it saw, this is what it thinks. So it thinks Buddhist text and translation are the most common topic, then Buddhist history and development, Buddhist philosophy and doctrines. Again, every piece of text here is from Notebook LM. I didn't edit this. Is all Buddhist community and life practices. I was a little surprised at how high that bumped up over interdisciplinary approaches, and especially above specific regional traditions. Again, this was a little humbling for me, since living, more or less studying only Tibetan Buddhism, principally I was kind of like, this is kind of, page 3 of the list here, one bullet item, but that's it. and then a potpourri of other topics. And again, if you're disappointed that your life's work is not represented here, then don't blame me, don't blame Notebook LM, okay? All right, so what does this approach miss? So I thought this was an important question to address. And these summaries are objective to a fault. We're missing this kind of unique human and collegial character of Buddhist studies that I've known ever since I was at Indiana. Like one article begins, or has in paragraph 2, while the Germans presented a vast bibliography, the American presentation did not attempt to include anything like a comprehensive bibliography, but instead ran way over time and characterized each individual work discussed as stunning. Yes, that's the field of Buddhist studies, I remember so well. Now, there was a little payback there. A later reviewer says, instead of a conclusion, referring to the same article that I just cited, G returns to his own work, and readers are again informed about the seminal significance of his contributions to the field. Okay, so just so you're clear, this is what you're missing when you use something like a bot to do the summary of your literature. And I'm joking about that, but Google and others put a lot of effort into, I think, making sure that what they produce doesn't offend, right? So if you're looking for controversy and snarky comments and so forth like that, don't use a chatbot. Okay. So on a summary of this AI-assisted reading approach of secondary literature, using these language models and chatbots to read secondary, it's especially convenient, and you get a modest amount of translation for free. I didn't get to showcase that in this example. And my own personal perspective is that since I needed to download the articles anyway, I conservatively estimated it would take me 10 to 15 hours, probably more like 20 to 30, highlighting, taking notes as I go. Using Notebook LMs, after loading the PDFs, I got a summary of the 12 or 13 papers and transcripts in about 30 seconds, although the large language model was probably warmed up by queries. So as I mentioned, there was this kind of humbling exit, realizing how small the field that I thought Buddhist study was. But on the positive side, I felt energized and optimistic rather than exhausted by all this detail. I never resented what I was doing, right? I was like, okay, this is fun. As educators, like it or not, I think this approach to reading, educators and publishers looking at this approach to reading is going to change how our students and readers of our works approach reading. Now, for those of you who are nauseated by that notion, I do have vomit bags here, which, Alex, just raise your hand.
I don't have enough.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And please don't be shy. I can easily understand. Okay. So, Bob's my conscience, and what's left for humans to do? Like a lot, right? So with all that time that I saved by not going line by line through those papers, I took a huge step back, and this was kind of my summary. On the far left, we have the objects of study, then moving to the right, the place of origin and the languages used, the focal point and perspective of the studies, the residence of where the scholar, so whoever was doing that scholarship, what university were they in, where was that located, these additional lenses of study, and the work products. And again, this was kind of partially, for the purpose of the conference, partially demonstrational of the tools, but I'm happy to discuss these at the break and so forth. Okay, so now moving on to the prime topic, how can AI assist Buddhist studies? So, at some point I realized this is a familiar position to me. I'm not here to sell you an AI assistant, but I have spent my entire professional career what pays the bills in building tools for people. And so I first did kind of a sense of the customer. And one key thing I learned from venture capitalists was, it's one thing to get an overview of what your customer does. It's another to really look, what do they really do in a day in their life? Because you really can't build a tool for them unless you really see how they spend their time. So this is a little model that I put. And first and foremost, or beginning inquire, and I do say foremost because I think in looking at our relationship with AI, inquiring may be the single most important thing that we do. You might think reflect, but I actually, nothing happens until we put something in the prompt. So the direction that we take may be the single most creative part of this process. And so what do we inquire about? We may inquire about big questions like when did the historical Buddha live? Kind of like Dan Martin, we may have a lifelong inquiry about a comprehensive view of Tibetan history. Or I think a lot of what I see is what might be individual passing fascinations. I came across a biography of Muchen Simpachimpo in which he mentioned that he had which is mentioned he had a guru who was a Tibetan. That sounds like something interesting to follow up. So, but a more kind of typical inquiry, and one that I thought I'd use for this, is a question of how did the four seals of Dharma evolve and become codified? So, some time ago, I read in a footnote of his translation of Nagarjuna's Mahaprajnaparamita Shastra, Etienne Lamotte gives several variants of Dharma Mudra. The seals of Dharma is found in Pali Sutra as well as Sanskrit sutras. And, this is one of those, what I learned back in Indiana. Some people write footnotes that are stronger than other people's long scholarly studies, right? So this is one of those amazing footnotes. But what struck me immediately like this, and I won't embarrass myself by taking you through the Pali and Sanskrit, I think this is a Buddhist studies crowd, so I think you're all familiar with these, is that the formulation that I was most familiar with, which I show in Tibetan here and in the translation, in particular, all contaminant things are suffering, wasn't there at all. So that was kind of disturbing. And look at, any of the kind of contemporary writings that I've found that address this notion of four seals, all of them agree with what I show you on this slide, and none of them agree with the presentation in the prior slide. So just to make that clear, I have the Sanskrit that Lamotte pointed to on the far left, I have the Tibetan equivalent in the middle, and then I have the more common formulation on the right. Now, I had originally planned, I really nerded out on this, and I had really planned to really kind of take you through it, and then suddenly it hit me, these people are not here to listen to me talk about the four seals. So I'm just going to kind of highlight the way in which I use these tools to come to this. So next search, and you'll understand why I say filter and read. So I tried good old Perplexity with some high-level prompts, and I won't take you through all the details, but the main thing that they did, that those prompts did, is point me to Stanley's dissertation, David Stanley's dissertation from 2009, which is a very broad dissertation, and it's only 5 pages in which he talks about the four seals, and particularly with regard to Tibet. But the key thing is he does talk about them explicitly, and he makes a couple points. He says, Longchenpa is the first Tibetan who mentions the four sutra seals, which I found interesting. And again, he's not talking about any particular formulation. He's saying mention them as four seals explicitly. And then he says there's additional evidence that Tibetans did not know of an Indian source for the four seals. So honestly, at this point, I'm kind of more confused than ever, right? So go to Indian train back to the primary sources. So I first did we came from yesterday to understand a syntactic or a keyword search, primary sources of BDRC. And it gave, doing an e-text search, and it gave a lot of references, but nothing from the Kangyur and Tangyur, right? Lots of Tibetan authors. Since Stanley brought up this, when did this first enter Tibet? I was curious to see, is he right, it was a Longchenpa or was there someone earlier? And sure enough, just going through the BDRC references, on the far left here you see a nice feature that they've added over the years in which you can sort the results of their e-texts through centuries. And so, just going sequentially through centuries, I found this nice quote by Gampopa. And then just kind of progressing through the centuries, I was then able to find things by Lama Shang, Jigten Sumgun, further in the Kagyu, and then in the 13th century spread into the Sakya, and then 14th century finally get to Stanley's observation of Longchen Drimi Ozer, and then by the time we see Tsongkhapa and Kedrupje quoting in precisely this manner, then we know basically the four schools have been covered. But still we don't have a Kangyur or Tangyur reference to this, anything like this Sakje Tamche Dungno. So, sounds like a job for an AI assistant to me. So using Sebastian's Mitra search for semantic search, which is now currently limited to just the canonical literature, I was able to get 27 results, including 2 Kangya references the Sandhi Nirmochana Sutra, and let's just call it Tohoku 155 if that's all right with you. And again, just to contrast those, so why wasn't BDRC able to help me? They tune up and take grammatical particles out and so forth, but basically it's still a syntactic search, whereas, as Sebastian pointed out, there's this difference in doing this semantic search, which is also multilingual. Okay, so I mentioned, in this new era of search, in which we get 2,700 other searches on Mitra Search gave 100, which is their max out. There's no way to go through that manually. So they've got this very nice thing you see down the bottom, this explanation button. So first of all, you get the text. So I can copy and paste this into Dharma Mitra and translate it if I can't read it quickly myself. Or I can just hit this explanation button, and what you see here is the explanation below of that passage. It's not a translation, so we should probably work on, would you like a translation or would you like an explanation? But it's still, it makes it much faster to go through those references than dutifully trying to sort out one by one. I'm just going to put you to Tohoku 155. And again, I'm highlighting this one passage. So now we have found this passage in a nice, naturally contextual place going back to Kangya. So that's progress. Mitra Search also showed lots of meaningful parallels in Tangir, particularly from the Abhidharma literature, and I'll see why that is relevant in just a moment. So, revisiting my inquiry, Sanskrit on the far left, Tibetan equivalent of the Sanskrit in the middle, and common Tibetan formulation on the far right, it's natural to kind of look more carefully into the Samskara versus Sasraba, or Duje versus Sakche. And so I do that doing standard library search. And this is a frustration I felt over my entire little amateur career, is you get these great articles in Japanese, but sounds like a job for an AI assistant to me. I just prompt now, I've already read that article in, give a complete translation selected source from Japanese to English. These prompts are important. Translate every word and sentence, otherwise it's going to just skip around and try and tell me that it did a good job. Please path through Japanese and Chinese technical terminology and translation, and this is what you get. And I won't, again, you're not here to hear me lecture about this, but I just want to demonstrate this capability. So, time for reflection. So this early Mitra searches, the Abhidharma literature really predominated. And so I've got this great book, Sanskrit book on Abhidharma that has all these diagrams in Sanskrit. I've transliterated them here. And what you see, so what do we get by using Sakche or Sasrava rather than Samskara or Duje? Well, if you look at this diagram, we get exactly one thing, which is Marga is excluded as an element of suffering. And that nicely led to, so I talked to Alex, and he recalled a conversation with David Rugg, who insisted on the formulation Sakche, Tamche Dugno, because otherwise, precisely, Marga, the noble path, is a samskara. In the first form, it would be suffering. In the second form, it is not. Nice, huh? Okay, so can an AI assistant help us to reflect? So I went through all this, and basically it was an afterthought. I never really gave Notebook LM a chance. I found a little something, I had some hypotheses. I immediately went to Alex. Alex was very kind. First of all, correcting all my Sanskrit diacritical mistakes, and then kind of sharing this nice story of his own reflections and David Rugg. But I never really gave Notebook LM. So I said, prompt, the four seals of Buddhism are considered to epitomize Buddhist view. Over time, one of the seals, and I use sorry, I should give some background. I'm bringing in this Lodo Sangpo's translation of Abhidharma Koshabhasya, and then I went in the prompt to use precisely that terminology so this is why Alex is not very happy with my translation choices, but I'm just trying to use homogeneity so that I get a better chance of getting results across different literature. Over time, one of the seals, all conditioned things are suffering, was reformulated as all impure things are suffering. So given this source for context, give a few speculations on why this reformulation occurs. And it actually gives a number of sensible ideas, I think, and in particular, this is the full result on clarifying the scope of suffering, which I mean, I don't think if I'd gotten this prompt, I would have been able to recreate the conversation with Alex. But I think, it might have led to another inquiry. Maybe I would have gotten there, maybe I wouldn't. But anyway. Okay, so I won't go through, again, try to explain to you the four seals and what we learned. We didn't, we did, well, briefly, we found it in the Kangir. We found it early in Tibet and had this particular observation that this excludes marga from the path of suffering. Sorry, marga, the path from inclusion as suffering, but obviously there's so much more to explore. So how did AI assist and what was their downside of that? Perplexity helped with initial references, not much after that. Mitra searches, semantic search was absolutely essential. I did a lot of translation, which I didn't show you. Some was perfectly obvious to me, I didn't need it, but longer, a couple paragraph passages, I just popped them in and got an immediate translation from Mitra or Cloud. And Notebook LM was again useful in organizing and translating secondary literature. So in this little video, it's really hard for me to see any downside to any of that assistance. All I think is that, a lot of the heavy lifting was done for me. The one thing is, I can easily imagine thinking that getting lulled into, oh yeah, now I don't have to do any work because these are not finding everything for you. So there's, if you want to be very thorough and bulletproof, then there's still work to be done. Okay, what does a Buddhist scholar do? There's also exposition. I'm going to shift gears a bit here because obviously I'm not prepared to talk about an exposition with regard to the four seals right now. So I'm going to talk about the different types of exposition that we do in Buddhist studies. This is from the beginning, and you can just read them there, and then I'll just briefly point out how AI can assist. So for reference materials, I think it was brought up yesterday, there's a lot that can be automated or semi-automated. I'm not going to talk about multimedia at all. Image, video, 3D generation, named entity recognition, language editing. So let's take a quick look at how machine translation can help. So I won't go through the history of this, but this is kind of my distillation. I have a whole document there at the bottom going into detail of kind of a synthesis on the translation process. And basically, depending on the type of material, as many of you know much better than I do, any one of these steps can dominate the process. Finding additions and trying to create a critical addition, or the draft translation itself, or just the footnotes. Any one of these can dominate, or Cyrus Stern says he spends most of his time just refining. 2/3 of his time goes to refining his translation. So machine translation obviously helps most when step 3 dominates. How to think about it? I just think of it as like a member of a translation team, a grad student seminar, and I give here a number of other things which 84,000, basically I think we're pretty much in agreement in the scope of what machine translation can do. And you might argue that this all boils down to being productive. And then Dan Martin did this nice blog post. He reflects that basically in so many words, is productivity really what we want? He's concerned that editing, starting with machine translation, will never give the best quality of translation. He's concerned that translators will use it as a crutch, and speed is only a virtue if you're getting paid by the hour. So this led me to the question, well, is a translator of Buddhism more like an artist, creating this kind of masterful piece of artistry, or are they more like an apothecary, which strives to create a medicine accurately according to a prescription? So I'm not going to resolve that at this very moment, but I think it's interesting dialogue. And Dan and I go back to Indiana over like 45 years ago, so it was a very pleasant engagement. And you'll see my comments on his blog spot. I actually put them to him personally, but he put them there. Okay, finally, educate. What we do is educate. So I just want to taunt you that online education is completely revolutionizing my field. We're getting high school students who, through Coursera classes, are pretty well educated when they show up as freshmen and publishing first author papers, doing research, original research as sophomores. So challenge you, can we do this for Buddhist studies, particularly for language learning? And to me, the key elements, which is why I didn't have this when I learned the Sanskrit, is gaining the ability to read what you want and interactive directed feedback on your progress. So these are demonstrated from Sebastian yesterday. I think that Mitra can make, particularly for Sanskrit, language learning more interactive and fun. You get your grammatical explanations for free. There's these natural questions. Will these tools help or hinder language learning? And so choosing your own literature and progressing at your own pace is fun and inspiring, I think. But of course, are you going to learn all those Sandhi rules, noun declensions, and verb conjugations if a tool does all that for you? And so I think the answer to this is this last piece of AI technology, which is called an agent or copilot, which the next step that this does is that it's actually able to do planning. It's not just prompt and result. It's able to plan and invoke other tools and so forth. Like something as simple as making a dinner reservation actually has many planning steps that have to be required to perform that. There's a huge investment in this. These are all these are just startups and agents that have occurred in the last 2 years. I mean, tens of billions of dollars are going into this. And so I think the last vision I have, I don't have anything to demonstrate on any of this, is really something more like a Buddhist studies private tutor, in which I could go and say something like, explain this passage to me in Tibetan, and everything that I've shown you today is kicking around in the far right there. It's all there to be had. It just needs to be found out, and what the agents do is do a little bit more proactive step in digging that stuff out. Okay, so in terms of the impact of Gen AI, and I am keeping an eye on, I know Alex is doing quite his job, even though we started late, and no instructions were given on the time of your talk either. So
you're over the period.
So yeah. Okay, Alex. In view of our friendship, I'm really going to wrap this up soon. Okay, so Martin Casado, one of my favorite VCs, says. The internet reduced the cost of distribution to zero. Gen AI reduces the cost of generation to zero. So reducing the cost of content generation to zero may be also Gen AI's biggest downside, which reminded me of a quote by Nietzsche that I had the hardest time, in time all my virtues became vices, my vices, something like that. So I asked Claude, and Claude found the quote. In the long run, my virtues proved to be most dangerous vices. And this perfectly illustrates the problem of Gen AI, because this is total confabulation. Nietzsche didn't say anything like that at all. You can go to Beyond Good and Evil, Epigrams and Unos, and bless its heart, perplexity caught Claude's mistake, and a careful reading confirms it. So, and it's not like Anthropic or Google or OpenAI are like, oh, hallucination, confabulate, what? No, it's like, basically they'll tell you, if you want chatbots that turn a parking ticket into a sonnet in style of Shakespeare, we have to continue with hallucination. That creativity is all part of it. And, but I just want to finish by saying we can eliminate hallucination in these tools. So, in summary, can AI assist Buddhist studies? For search, I showed Perplexity AI and Mitra search. For reading, I showed you Notebook LM, modern languages, for modern languages, Mitra, for primary languages. Reflection, it'll give you lots of ideas. You can judge where you like them or not. Expositing, these AI tools can help us with composition as well as help us with our translations. And I gave you some vision of a Buddhist studies personal tutor. Now, just my final slide, Alex, before you attack me. I encourage you to try these tools. It's much easier to experiment with them to speculate or philosophize about them. I encourage you to put your work online and freely accessible. I do. This is going to help advance the world of knowledge. Yeah, the World Wide Web has a lot of junk. These tools spend a lot of time trying to sort the chaff from the grain there. The World Wide Web is what we make it. We have created a field of text and document analysis, and if we're going to have a dialogue, we've got to learn your vocabulary, and we're trying, but you also need to become familiar with ours. And maybe the last thing I really want to get across was data is so important to progress in using these tools for Buddhist studies. Marcus, and I'm looking exactly at you. Find it, catalog, digitize it, e-text it. I think that the value of data collection has been overshadowed in Buddhist studies by, philological perspectives and interpretive methods. But something like creating a central corpus of Sanskrit and Tibetan e-texts would greatly advance the field and be much more lasting than expositing on the latest topic du jour. So I really hope we'll see data collection and curation is raised to a top level. And thank you.
One brief comment, Kurt. I do agree that the need there to have a well-curated corpus of e-texts in Sanskrit, I completely agree. I mean, what I see a lot happening that people have their own private collections. It makes a huge difference what people have access to. Of course, Gretel has done a great job in this, but there are zillion collections beyond Gretel that people have individually. If we had a central way of curating text, people adding to this, I'm thinking of my friends in Hamburg who are sitting on a trove of treasures that nobody has access to, only a few lucky ones. I completely agree with this. For Sanskrit, it definitely would make a difference. Thank you, Kurt, for the thoughtfulness in the talk. Please.
Thanks, Kurt. Terrific talk. So since this is sort of just kind of a broader sort of philosophical question, because you brushed aside the sort of the more interpretive stuff, obviously these are very effective and very powerful tools. And obviously every scholar, including any junior scholar making their way up, through the ranks would greatly benefit from them. But this sort of raises a broader kind of philosophical question. The Buddhist tradition is a live tradition, right? So the whole point of engaging critically with this literature is to generate new ideas, to adapt these ideas to the context and the problems of today. But it seems to me here that the work of primarily focusing on the textual tradition turns the tradition itself into some sort of a object of worship. So the idea is that, well, we don't really care about the relevance of Buddhist ideas to various contexts today. We really care about making sense of this text as best we can, and the tools that we now have at our disposal allow us to do so. My question is okay, so we have these tools for data extraction, for finding out patterns in the vast body of literature, and so to what use do we put them for the scope of advancing the current conversation on the significance of Buddhist studies and Buddhism more broadly?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I guess I'm supposed to hold this too. But in some sense, this is above my pay grade, right? I mean, I'm an amateur Buddhologist. I look at what I've going back to my days at Indiana. I saw what people were doing. I did this kind of much objective study, which put text and history as number one and number two. That's my, you might say, customer base. That's what I've seen people do my whole career. Berkeley puts a lot of emphasis on philology, digging into original sources and so forth, maybe a little less on the interpretive or methodological aspect. That's the group that I'm trying to reach. If suddenly the whole field turns on its head and says, no, it's all about interpretation, Buddha was just a guy, another philosopher, interesting, but there are a lot of philosophers, let's put that all in context. Okay, that's a whole different problem statement than I've attacked in my talk. Yeah.
Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you, Professor Kurt, for your insights here.
Now, are you going to bargain about a midterm grade? Because whenever I hear professor, I know that's a bad sign.
I'm trying to show you respect. I'm actually faculty at UC Berkeley in AI and product management.
Okay.
So here's my thought. I've studied Buddhism non-academically. So I'm trying to view this from the middle way of Buddhism. Not an absolute no versus AI, and not an absolute yes without guardrails. And you ended your talk basically with, we can prevent the hallucinations. Mm-hmm. And then on prior slides, you also talked about showing some helpful examples on data that's coming out. I think the point that I wanted to comment on is that if AI is interpreted as machines approximated by not only human intelligence, but human bias, I think we can pay more attention to the bias and misunderstandings of the original writers and translators of these Buddhist texts, because the machine will then learn that bias and misunderstanding, pass it off to us in more subtle ways than the Nishiki example. For example, sutras are noticeably biased in gender. So these are harms we should really look out for. So anyone who's interested in this, to me, highly recommended, if you haven't read already, Unmasking AI by Dr. Joy Buolamwini. She's testified in front of Congress multiple times, founder of Algorithmic Justice League. She's talked about the harms of AI, including people being thrown in jail.
Your question, we're running.
Yeah, was there a question in there?
No,
we're welcome this as a comment, but
I preface this was a comment.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much. So we have one question from Bob Miller, who is there remotely. Bob, it's not your turn yet, but we are happy to field your question. Please tell us.
Yes. Okay. So I just had a quick question. Thanks, Kurt, for your presentation, by the way. It's lovely to see you. I thought that was really interesting how you're talking about the fine tuning and then the further development of these, these technologies through the use of the RAG, the retrieval augmented generation software. So that's what my question is about. On the slide that you showed, that this process of RAG goes through, onto the World Wide Web, including organizations such as the one that I work for, 84,000. I was just wondering, you also mentioned that you're an investor in Perplexity AI. So what kind of discussion has there been around the compensation for the use of these training resources in for-profit applications like Perplexity AI? Thanks.
So is where you're headed, like Perplexity AI is using 84,000's data, for example, shouldn't they be paying for it?
That is the broad philosophical question I mean to raise. 84,000 and Perplexity AI are simply examples of that.
Did you want me to pay for it? Well, I'm not sure where we're at. No, honestly, I'm not sure. I get the very broad scope of your question, which is a good one. And again, it's a Pamela Samuelson kind of question. I mean, I think the good news is, the people I see in this room have been so helpful. I see nothing but people who've, after mainly right out of the bat helpful, maybe one organization or two is grumbling now and then. But so I think everything we're doing is with blessing, and we're charging zero for it. So I don't know how we would pay. If you want to, so that's us, that's Mitra Search. Now, if you want to go to something like Perplexity, yeah, we see the New York Times suing OpenAI. I think there's also a similar case now against Perplexity and so forth. I don't know that it's really to our benefit to try to sort that out today. I'm happy to talk to a reviewer, but I'll even buy it. But
yeah, I of course don't think we could resolve this today, but nevertheless, given the implications of your talk, I thought it was an important issue to raise for our
I think for what we're doing, I think it's important that we stay on good terms and don't feel we're misusing the data that we're using beyond. And so I think that's the scope of the world that I live in. Is that satisfactory or?
I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Okay, we have time. You're talking later, so